First Homestand weekend is upon us, as the Overwatch League fever will fill the Allen Event Center in North Texas. While a lot of focus will rightfully be on the execution of the event, the 8 teams setting up on stage will have plenty to play for. Despite some of the league's powerhouses staying in LA, nearly all teams competing during Week 4 are still in the stage playoff race. With these squads all booked for back-to-back doubleheaders, some will inevitably walk out with a stranglehold on the spot, while others will fade out of the picture. Here are 3 storylines we should be paying extra attention to during this historic event. The Dallas Fuel are heading home to greet their fans with a residual bad taste in their mouths. There was a lot of hype behind the team heading into Week 3, during which it went 0-8 in map score against the Vancouver Titans and the Seoul Dynasty, leaving a lot of question marks ahead of their homestand. There's no shame falling to the Stage 1 champions, but the Dynasty game was somewhat perplexing. After a very slow start, Dallas woke up in the second half. They did put together a terrific Einkevalde defense, which set the table for a potential reverse sweep. With the finish line mere meters away on their own attack and 4 minutes left on the clock, it seemed inevitable that the Fuel would take map 3. However, Toby would have none of that, clutching fight after fight and seeing Seoul somehow running out the clock and securing the victory right there. Gibraltar was also a close affair, with the Fuel setting an incredible pace on their attack. However, Overwatch can be merciless in overtime. The Dynasty made the most out of their large time bank deficit, snowballing almost the entirety of the map behind Munchkin's early biotic grenade play. Week 3 showed that Dallas hadn't quite broken through to top tier just yet, but the Fuel still feels like a side that should beat up on weaker opposition with relative ease. Beyond enjoying a home court advantage this weekend, Dallas will also be facing lesser opposition in the Valiant and the Outlaws. Following the understandable Week 1 thrashing by the seemingly untouchable San Francisco Shock, the Valiant have looked somewhat improved, sitting at 2-2 this stage. LA pulled out their first victory in Week 2 in what was a scrappy 3-2 affair over the Atlanta Reign, who were missing a key cog in Daco. They then lost their claim to LA supremacy in a 1-2 defeat to the Gladiators. The Gladiators are extremely strong this stage, but it was difficult to get a feel for the Valiant, despite the close scoreline. They hung in on Lijiang Tower and looked competitive. They then got stopped on the second point of Hanamura, but the Gladiators, playing everything but 3-3, once again fell in their Kryptonite map and handed their rivals a draw. Einkevalde was a dominant win by the Gladiators, and with the game decided, Valiant managed to full hold on Rialto in garbage time, which was a pleasant finish, despite the Gladiators taking out their starter in Shaz in favor of Ripa and holding the Valiant on second point. While these aren't the types of performances that should scare Dallas, it would be foolish not to acknowledge the fact that Valiant's 3-3 play has leveled up since Stage 1 to the point where they're competent enough to sting back if you get sloppy. They proved this by completely thrashing the Washington Justice in the Rhine 3-3 mirror, showing that they've exited the bottom tier purgatory. Few teams have struggled as much as Houston lately, who could slide down to last place in stage standings if they can't find a win in their home state. The Outlaws, who haven't found a map win in their last 10 attempts, are also coming in cold. Their 0-3 loss to the Shanghai Dragons was particularly perplexing. Following a complete 200-0 shutout on Oasis, the Outlaws bounced back on Anubis. Houston's Sombra Goats play looked solid, with everyone making big plays across the board. Unfortunately, the Dragons returned the favor with their own full hold, ending the map 0-0. A real tilter. Despite yet another solid defense, Houston once again couldn't crack the first point on Blizzard World, losing the set right there. Like everyone else at the event, Houston will play Dallas on a back-to-back, with a tough outing against a surging Seoul waiting just the day before. Dallas didn't make the playoffs last stage with a tough schedule, but there is no excuse to miss the festivities this stage. The homestand is set up perfectly for a 2-0 week, and the team should really cap the stage off undefeated with the Mayhem waiting back in LA for Week 5. The Fuel has a lot to prove here. Sitting at 2-2, they have to put on a show, because every map counts. Last stage, Dallas came out on the wrong end of a 5-team tie, and climbing out of their current -3 hole is paramount. The Seoul Dynasty season has been a weird one so far. The Pride of Korea went 4-3 in Stage 1, despite a pretty difficult schedule. The Dynasty looked a little shaky, but then went on to upset the undefeated New York Excelsior in the stage playoffs, prior to falling to the eventual champions in Vancouver. The schedule hasn't been much kinder in Stage 2. Seoul fell to the LA Gladiators and the Titans prior to the convincing 4-0 performance against Dallas last week. So far, 8 out of Seoul's 10 regular season opponents have had a record of 500 or higher. Despite this, a quick glance at map differential clearly suggests that the Dynasty belong far higher than 14th in the Stage 2 standings. Seoul does have the luxury of a large roster, and they have rotated it on more than a few occasions. For a time, a good chunk of the bench players came in for control maps and looked more than serviceable. The internal competition appears to be fierce within the squad, as the team's superstar Faletta fell out of the starting lineup in favor of Fitz, who now occupies the Zarya role. Fitz does seem like an upgrade in this meta, passing both the eye test and having the edge in the statistical department over his teammates so far. Marvel and Toby also started in favor of Fisher and Jexi against the Fuel, and seemed to gel well, with the seemingly forgotten Toby putting up an incredible vintage performance in Eichenwalde. Will the Dynasty stick to the same starting lineup that is now showing a lot of promise, or is it still in flux? It's an interesting thing to keep an eye on. Despite the volatility and some weirdness surrounding Seoul, it is a team that continuously finds itself ranked very high in most community power rankings, rightfully getting the benefit of the doubt following an impressive semi-final run in Stage 1. Still, the schedule excuse won't last forever, and it's important for Seoul to stabilize and put some wins on the board. After all, only the top 6 teams are guaranteed a spot at the end of the season playoffs, and Seoul has some catching up to do to separate itself from the middle pack. From what we've seen out of this team so far, that should certainly be an attainable goal. However, in Week 5, Hangzhou and Vancouver await back in LA. This means that if the Dynasty cannot get past the Titans, they most likely need to win the remainder of their games with a solid map differential to make the Stage 2 playoffs. That is certainly attainable, and the run has to start this weekend with Seoul facing the same struggling opponents that Dallas is in the Valiant and the Outlaws. The sweethearts of the Overwatch League, the Chengdu Hunters, are heading into the Homestand event sitting at 2-2 and 7th in the stage standings. The hamster-loving Chinese side has displayed some solid DPS play throughout the season. The fan-favorite team might have 3 starters in the All-Star game, but if the hype train isn't derailed yet, it's certainly showing signs of slowing down. With 3-3 dominating the AL landscape, Hunters were still good enough to beat up those teams who weren't polished enough in their fundamentals. However, lately it does appear as though this team has finally been figured out. The Gladiators laid out a clear blueprint during Week 3, dominating every second of the matchup against Chengdu, excluding Hanamura, which continues to give the Glads problems. LA relied on the Sombra Moira dive goats for the entirety of the set, putting on a blistering pace and executing the Hunter's Kryptonite composition to perfection. With no clear targets to dive and kill, Among being constantly marked, and the inability to swap to a competent 3-3, the Hunters simply had no answers. Just a week earlier, the Shanghai Dragons also put a beating on Chengdu. While Shanghai was full-held and dropped Paris, none of the other maps were close. Behind Dink's fantastic Pharah, the Dragons diffused Chengdu's compositions on Lijiang Tower with ease, cruising to a 200-0 shutout. King's Row wasn't much different, as Shanghai dominated the Sombra Goats matchup on defense and out-Chengdu on their own attack with a funky 2-2 composition. Shankartown was also secured with a healthy time bank cushion. Both Shanghai and the Gladiators have looked like solid playoff contenders, while the Hunters have in a way been gatekeepers, consistently falling to the top dogs while giving teams below them a headache. Behind Gesture's improved Reinhardt play and always solid Winston, as well as Prophet's continued excellence, the London Spitfire are undefeated this stage. They have also shown enough competence with the Sombra Moira composition throughout the stage, and should in theory be able to replicate the Gladiators' performance without too much hassle. The Hangzhou Spark, on the other hand, who is sitting at 2-2 with a poor map differential this stage, is the type of team that could struggle a little against the Hunters. It has to be noted though that the Spark, while a little shaky, did dispose of Guangzhou and Boston, while falling to the unbeatable Vancouver and San Francisco. Map score aside, the Spark has looked like one of the strongest Winston 3-3 teams in the league, behind Goucher's phenomenal mechanics, but they do drop a couple of levels when transitioning to the Reinhardt. Even so, Chengdu is not necessarily the type of team to expose a shaky Rhine, and Goucher should be able to stay on Winston for a decent chunk of this match. Godsby has also shown a serviceable Sombra, and you have to favor the Spark here considering how the two teams match up. It does feel like Chengdu's stock is trending down lately, and it could plummet completely, especially considering who stands in their way this weekend. Since all participants play twice this weekend, we should get a very decisive answer as to where all these teams stand. Is London going to march undefeated this stage? Will Paris plummet against tough opposition, or can the European side stay in the stage playoff race? Is Spark ready to make a run at top 10? Can the Valiant and the Outlaws climb out of their holes? There are plenty of interesting storylines beyond the ones we covered, so make sure you tune in and enjoy the action this weekend.